Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and today I am going to talk about some indie games. I am very excited about this. I just got back from Adepticon, and I have a lot to talk about. I will talk about what went down in the Warcry event, where the Warcry metagame kind of stands coming out of that event. But right now, I'm very excited because the skirmish space, specifically the fantasy skirmish space, is in an incredible inflection point right now where tons of amazing games are coming out. There are more great games in the fantasy skirmish game space than I will be able to talk about today. But I went into the Adepticon vendor hall and my life was changed. Everything is different now. Basically, the Adepticon vendor hall is the indie Super Bowl of wargaming. And last year, I walked around it a good bit, but honestly, it wasn't quite on the same level as far as new games coming out that it is now, right? So, for example, Corvus Belli had their game and it hadn't come out yet, Warcrow, and they were like, coming soon, Warcrow, but we didn't know what that was going to be. Conquest, still kind of focusing at that time on their sort of big army game, and they have a skirmish version, but that wasn't the focus of their booth, and there were just way fewer of the sort of mid-sized games like Arc World and Relic Blade that were kind of coming out. But right now, I think a lot of people who want to be creators in the tabletop gaming space are looking at what happened to D&D, where D&D made some of their customers angry, and all of a sudden, they went from having a massive monopoly in the space, seemingly untouchable, to they're still doing well. As many, is D&D dying videos as you'll see, D&D is doing great. But they just left a crack in the door open, and the indie creators are kind of flooding through, and they are creating a whole bunch of tabletop RPGs that kind of fit their own goals and fit their own vibes, and people are loving them and playing them and having a great time. And there's sort of this indie renaissance that's coming into that space. And I think a lot of creators in the tabletop wargaming space are trying to make that happen, especially skirmish games, because they require so much less buy-in and they're so much more accessible. So I walked around the vendor hall, I played a ton of games, I checked out a ton of games, and I'm going to bring you the ones that were most promising to me. And the games that I think, if you love Warcry, like my channel has always been a primarily Warcry focused channel. And don't worry, just because I'm making this video doesn't mean I'm quitting Warcry. But if you love Warcry, I think you'll love these games. So just a quick talk about what that means. What makes Warcry great in my mind? One is the smooth gameplay. Another is the really incredible list building. And then there's kind of the fact that the tactics of Warcry are really easy to grasp and easy to think that you know what you're doing, and really hard to master and really hard to kind of fully have your mind around every single piece of it, which I think is really excellent. It takes ages and ages of playing Warcry to get to a point where you're not really being surprised anymore. You can do it. It's not an infinitely large game, but it is a very large game, and it's much larger than it appears at first glance. Then finally, it's the fact that the hobbying in Warcry is so approachable. There's a lot you can do with a little bit of time if you get into Warcry, and I really love that. And so when I looked around the hall thinking about the various games that were on offer, I really spent a lot of time looking at what are the kinds of games that are offering experiences that, one, someone who loves those four things would get into, but two, something that kind of expands or adds to it. Because there are things that within this package of four amazing things they do well, there are things that Warcry doesn't do that well and could be improved, right? I was really interested to see what kinds of games were out there and what kinds of experiences Warcry lovers could get. And the first one I want to talk about is Judgment. Judgment has been around for a little while. It was sort of the darling / big winner out of skirmish games at Adepticon last year. I joined their Kickstarter, their original Kickstarter. I can actually see my Judgment core set right over there. And I just never played it. It's complex. I was really, really into what was happening in Warcry at the time, and I kind of needed someone to teach me the game. Finally, I talked with a really awesome dude at the Judgement booth. His name was Simon. Loved him. He did not know I had a YouTube channel. I didn't tell him. And I sort of dove into it both. I checked it out quite a bit before going to Adepticon, but then dove into it a little bit more after I left that booth. And what Judgement has that I don't think any other game on the market right now has is sort of the complete package. And what do I mean when I say the complete package? I mean what Games Workshop does that is incredibly hard to reproduce. And as much as we make fun of them for their messy rules writing, etc., they create games that can be lifestyle games where they are releasing new models, they are releasing new rules, they are creating all kinds of hobby space and hobby opportunities. They are sort of creating the fact that they're very easy to buy. They're doing all of this at once, and it's really, really difficult to coordinate all of that. It kind of takes a massive effort. And so it's almost impossible for indie companies to do that. But Creaturecaster has managed it, and Creaturecaster is really coming on lately. They are the printing and sort of production and sort of distribution studio now for Trench Crusade, which is incredibly exciting as far as I actually don't like the vibe of Trench Crusade, but in terms of the fact that they are taking on these big projects and feeling the confidence to do so. And we know from how they've executed Judgement that they have the kind of infrastructure to do it, which is incredible. So when I say a lifestyle game, let's get into it. Judgement has 6 different factions and 50 characters, and the characters are allowed to mix and match within the factions however they want. However, they get bonuses based on which factions they're in. So most of the characters will have 2 factions that they're a little bit better in than the others, and so for any one faction you'll have that spread, but they'll also have other types of characters that they are going to be better with. So Simon, I hope that they must have announced this at some point, but Simon told me that they were going to be coming out with rules to create kind of sub-factions that go across faction bonuses. So for example, there are the 6 factions, each based off of a god of purgatory, and each champion is in 2 of those factions. But if you play all the dwarves together, your 5 dwarves might be from 4 different sub-factions, but they'll all get a unified rule based on that, right? So that is coming out soon. So it has this thing of a really deep roster. They're really high quality sculpts. You can buy them on Creaturecaster's website. They're not in very many game stores yet, but I've seen the Judgement core set in game stores, and they're just very easy to get online, which is great. Again, if you've never seen Creaturecaster sculpts, they're amazing. Creaturecaster has its own painting competition. It's called Resin Beast. If you go to Adepticon, you have to check it out. A lot of people who submit to Golden Demon will also submit to Resin Beast. I did see one of my favorite experiences at any of these cons is always seeing the professional painters hanging out, talking shit about other professional painters' pieces when they don't think anybody else is listening to them. I got to hear some of that happening with 2 pro painters near the Resin Beast thing. So they've got kind of all these pieces that are required to have a lifestyle game. They also have the beginnings of fully fleshed out lore, just like a cool premise for the game. Essentially there are 6 gods who rule purgatory and are fighting over control of the plane, and if any one of them wins all of it, then they can shape all of the planes to their own image. It's kind of cool. And so some of the champions are kind of flavored around different gods. Some of the champions are flavored around different kinds of settings that are out there. They also have balance updates every 6 months, and the creators of the game are very invested in the rules at both a casual and a tactical level, which I think is something that if you play GW games, you might actually be missing, right? So for example, when I did a demo and Simon kind of figured out that I was interested in this kind of stuff, he sort of tailored his explanation to be like, all right, here I am telling you about the action economy of the game. Now I'm talking to you about the fate economy of the game and the leveling economy of the game and the movement and like the different mechanics of the game coming together in a very complex and tactical way while being grokkable. I'll show you a character in a minute so that you can see what I mean. The other thing that's going on with Judgment, which is really nice, is hex tiles. Everything is based on hexagons, and it makes movement really drama-free. I don't know very many people who like are truly in love with the way that a game like Warcry has you moving around the board. People kind of, I think, most folks think of it as like a cost to doing business and a means to a greater end, right? Well, the hexagons in Judgment work really well, and something that they've put real effort into is making hex-based terrain that doesn't look oddly unnatural and segmented and kind of can help draw you into the fantasy, and I think they've done a really good job at that. Another thing that is incredible about Judgment is that the rules are free. In fact, they've got a website, a kind of sub-website that is separate from CreatureCaster called hallofeternalchampions.com, where they've just got every rule. You can get all the rules for every hero, every monster, every summon, every artifact. You can even get competitive rankings on there, which is incredible. So they really care about matched play. They really care about making sure that every single person who's interested in this game has all the tools that they need to try to play it, which I love. I think that's so awesome, and I think that's so rare to see, especially, again, if you're coming from Warcry, where if it weren't for a certain website that we probably can talk about because GW doesn't watch my channel, Warcrier, if it weren't for Warcrier, this kind of thing just wouldn't exist. And Warcrier is not made by GW, and it's, technically not something that they like existing. So I think this is incredible. I also think that just the way they bake flavor into every character is really well done with Judgment. So here I've got the character card for Carva, Chimera Warrior. Carva is this really cool, I guess he is a chimera, but he strikes me as like a kind of a frog dinosaur with intelligence kind of deal. If you want to kind of map that to whatever faction is your favorite in GW games, you certainly can, and he makes a great proxy if you want that. You can also then come in and proxy, if you already have existing GW sculpts, you could probably proxy them in for Carva just fine. But what it does here is every character just has so many flavorful abilities. So you see they've got kind of innate abilities, and those kick in at different times during the game. They also have leveling abilities. So when he levels up, because these characters can go from level 1 to 2 to 3 over the course of a game, when he levels up, he also gets other benefits. So not only do the characters kind of feel different to play, besides just having different stats, but they are also going to feel different in terms of how they progress throughout the game, which is kind of cool. So if we kind of look across, a lot of the abilities are just written in a way that's pretty easy to grok, right? So Carva is a frontline healer, right? So he has an ability, Thorns. Whenever a friendly non-defender within 2 hexes is damaged but not killed by an enemy melee basic attack, Carva can choose to interrupt it, and it happens after damage has been taken, but before combat maneuvers. I'll explain that in a second. It's not very hard. Half that damage is dealt to the attacking model, and the friendly model heals for the amount dealt. So basically, you can save a friendly to reflect damage back on an enemy. So Carva is like a medic, but a medic that has to be in the fight to do their medicing. So kind of a frontline combat medic, which I think is really cool and a really awesome kind of play style. And with 50 different champions and each one of them having an evocative play style, it's kind of up to you to create these crazy combos of which different synergies you're really into. And it can be really easy to create your own kind of unique, your unique crew of 3 or 5. The game can either be played 3v3 or 5v5. The other thing that I think is really incredible about Judgment is I think they have the best combat resolution mechanic that I've seen in any of these games. And so what I mean by that is basically you roll d6s, which to be honest, I don't love d6s, but that's where we're at. You roll d6s, and you have sort of on each one fails, damage, maneuvers, and then a 6 is the equivalent of getting both. And so you deal damage based on how many little X's you get. So if you only get one, it's a glance. You can get a solid, you can get a crit. And Carva being 2, 3, 4 is not the norm, actually. Most of them have like more spread between them. But basically, on the dice you've rolled, you kind of choose whether or not you're more interested in dealing damage or using your maneuvers. And so you'll roll based on, certain outcomes give you maneuvers, certain outcomes give you damage, and then you have to think tactically as you attack. But because there aren't just like a ton of extra rolls, it's still, and there aren't a ton of characters on the board, it still resolves really quickly, which is nice because you'll often, once you know your characters, and there's only 5 to learn, you'll know which maneuvers are your favorites, and then it's all about positioning after that. You need to be really smart about where you put your fighters to make those maneuvers gives kind of maximum value. You don't really want to be getting into a combat where you have to roll a really high damage roll, because then it's like, half your potential value is gone, right? So in my demo, I rolled and I got no damage, all maneuvers once, and I got all maneuvers, no damage once. And Simon kept rolling so that he could get damage and maneuvers, but he just playfully noted that he's much better at rolling dice than me. It kind of creates an incredibly layered thing where there are uncertain outcomes, but there is a ton of skill in creating situations where each potential uncertain outcome is going to be beneficial for you in some way. And that's going to be clearly like the thing that separates the really good players from the not as good ones. So even though it's hex based instead of just like infinitely small millimeters of movement based, there's a ton of thought that you can put into positioning if you want to. But also because it's hex based, you can just kind of plop your guys forward if you want to as well, which is really neat. The final thing is from a hobby perspective, the fighters in Judgment, the idea of everyone fighting for purgatory is this situation where the gods can kind of pull people out of the time stream to fight for them. And so you get fantasy heroes fighting alongside science fiction heroes, and you can sort of self-express however you want to that way. You can go really crazy if you want, or you can just get really excited about just the quality of creature caster sculpts and get into it that way. So I think Judgment is kind of, at this point, they've built up a game that from the ground up can hit you at every point of the curve. The only thing they're really missing is a campaign, which, hit me up, guys, if you want someone to help you write a campaign. But that really does feel like the only thing they're really missing right now to be a fully realized type of game that can compete on every single level of what a game like Warcry is doing. And I think that's really impressive. And they're kind of, in terms of execution, they're doing the thing that every indie game developer should aspire to eventually be doing. And if there was ever a game or a studio that could rise to rival some of the sort of bigger studios that are out there, I would pick Creature Caster to be the ones to figure it out. Now, that doesn't mean they're the only game that blew me away. And the next one is called Malediction. And by the way, if you did find this video from Goonhammer, great website, really excited to put this video up on there. I hope that, well, first, welcome to the channel. And second, I hope that you take some time to play Warcry or play one of these games. And if you have a good time with it, or if you think you might have a good time with it, click like on this one or subscribe to the channel. It'll help more people find out about these games and about Warcry, which is also a pretty sweet game. I think Malediction was probably the biggest winner from Adepticon out of any studio anywhere, including GW. I think I've heard a lot of rumors of people getting big into their stuff after seeing it. I had never even heard of Malediction before I went to Adepticon. But their booth was just so impressive. The minis there were so impressive that I had to get a demo in. I was incredibly regretful that I couldn't buy any of the stuff at the demo display, and so I just immediately went and found their game found and bought 2 of the factions, just right there. So, what is Malediction? Malediction is a fantasy skirmish game. It's more solidly fantasy than Judgment, which I just went over, and it is a minis game where you also have sort of deck building card gameplay. You are going to start the game with a champion, and I'll get through some of those in a second. They are, in my opinion, what really separates this game. You're going to start with a champion and a deck of cards, and you'll have resources, and you are going to draw some cards. And then each card is essentially, there are like sorceries where you do effects on your minis that are on the board. Kind of, if you're watching this because this is a Warcry channel, kind of like your dice abilities, except they're cards you draw. And there are summons where you summon troops and you spend resources to get troops, and the troops come out from your deployment zone. And so then, while your hand of cards are being executed and deployed, your miniatures also have just regular miniature strategy and gameplay and tactics to them. And so there are kind of these 2 games going on that are fully integrated in a way that's really, really nice. Obviously, Underworlds is doing this, but no one other than Underworlds is doing it. And one thing that's really nice about Malediction is it's just coming out with, I think it's 85 cards per faction right now, and that's it. So what you make for your deck of 50 cards out of that group of 85 is kind of up to you, and you figure that out, and then you are really just playing a miniatures game while you do that. And so there's Underworlds, there's a lot of like, the cards are kind of the only thing happening on the minis. The minis are already there. A lot of it here is you're summoning minis and then you're playing the minis across the board while achieving objectives, things like that. It's really cool. It takes about the time of a Warcry game, which is great. And I think they've done a really great job with the opening factions that are available. There are 4 here, and there's pretty clear play styles. There is Primal Blood, and we've got one of the people up there right now. They kind of have a YOLO, all aggro, all the time, in your face kind of play style. Thunder Steps, for anyone who loves Warcry, Thunder Steps is the coolest Fomo Crusher I've ever seen. But yeah, he's like a Cyclops with a ruby eye. He's just very big and scary. He is the biggest and scariest thing in the game, and he's pretty incredible to look at, I think. Then we've got Conclave of the Spheres. That is it. And they are kind of a tricksy control faction that is going to have a lot of spells, a lot of sort of ways to disrupt the opponent. Laundriel here is a champion from that one that kind of caught my eye a little bit. Then we have, these guys are like a sort of hybrid faction of spells and chaff, where they're kind of throwing direct damage spells at you while hiding behind a horde of zombies. This is the Legion of the Fallen. And then we have the Order of the Shattered Throne. They have one character who is very Elspeth coded, in my opinion, and then one who is just like a badass Forge Dwarf. Not that Elspeth isn't badass, but you know what I mean. By the way, Legion of the Fallen also has a very Liliana coded fighter as well, and you could call this guy Sorin coded as well. But what I think they do incredibly well is, yes, some of these do adhere to like larger gaming archetypes, but they're a very cool original spin on them. I think Thunder Steps is so cool. I think all of these are really awesome, and I think this is one of my favorite Forged Dwarves I've ever seen. But these guys are like, they're like defensive, in-your-face bullies, like running up in your face and kind of pushing you around with a shield, kind of very aggressive, but like defensively aggressive, which I think is a really cool play style, kind of like a little bit alpha blocking-y, but because the deployment points are so or far apart. You can't just like in AOS, you can't just like boom teleport in your opponent's face and they can't move, but instead you're just kind of like running up and bulldogging them a little bit. This is the faction I played in my demo game, is why I'm talking about them this way. So a really cool set of factions with their own unique aesthetics. Each faction has 2 heroes, and each hero gives a sort of different twist on the overall playstyle of that faction, which I think is really cool. The only things right now, I think that Malediction is about 80% there to the point where Judgement is, where they're ready to like take real swings at Games Workshop and become like a long-term sustainable game. And I'm really excited about them. They're brand new. But right now, if you go on the Game Found, the minis there are standees. And then as soon as you buy it, you get the code to purchase the STLs, and then you or a buddy or someone with a 3D printer needs to print the STLs. I don't know right now if there are Etsy prints of these. I do know that some of the factions are fairly proxyable if you're into that, if you want to just buy the rulebook or, buy the standees and the cards. Really what you're getting when you buy those factions is the rulebook, the cards, and then you get to know the base sizes of everybody too, because the standees are on like individualized standees so that you know the base size. But then the cards are just really high quality cards. You can put them in any kind of card sleeve you want, and that's how you'll build your decks and play the game. Everything from this is gettable on Game Found right now. This is something that I'm super excited to get into. I think it's going to take them a while to get like a player base because, they're really just starting out. The Game Found, I think, ships in April. This display at Adepticon was the very first kind of display they've done at one of these cons. But I think there's a lot to get excited about here. I think the art direction is really cool. The setting, I think, is really well put together as far as what each of these factions stands for and is trying to achieve in the setting. I won't ruin it. You can go online and take a look yourself. Again, I do wish there was some kind of campaign here. Again, hit me up if you want me to write you a campaign. I honestly think I would be so excited to write a campaign for either Malediction or Judgement. I just think both of those games are just like the real deal right now, and like really poised to take a bite out of Games Workshop in a way that we've never really seen, except for like very briefly Warma Hordes managed it, right? Anyway, I think these games are ready to give a real wake-up call to Games Workshop in terms of how they manage their skirmish games, and I think it's really exciting to get on the ground floor of them. One game that's a little bit smaller, a little bit more under the radar, a little bit just like one guy and his fanzine. This is an all vibes zine game that is sort of a rulebook managed by one guy, and it basically asks the question, what if everything was undead? This is Necropolis28, and it is a very sort of atmospheric, it markets itself as a diorama skirmish game. I didn't know about this game until my buddy Avery actually did a demo of it at Adepticon. I did not get to do a demo of this game, but after I heard about it, I dove into the rules. I dove into the rules of a bunch of games at Adepticon, and this one really stood out. There were a couple questions I had at first, like, can't any game be a diorama game? What does it mean to be a diorama game, really? And the idea really here is it's all just suggestions. And what this does is the rules just like empower you and like lightly cajole you into just taking the suggestions at all times. And what I mean by that is, let's look at the list building. I actually think the real reason to play this game is the incredible list building, where they kind of focus on playability and flexibility. And again, because they talk about it as like a diorama game, like you should build the board before you even put down the factions, and you should, it should be all tender loving care. That's generally any game that has 28 in the title, it's going to be like that. But then what they do is they create a situation where you can have any of 5 covenants, but there's not a ton of stress put on like what each covenant stands for. And you can have 3 different types of leaders, but each one is a fairly broad category. and each type of leader can go in each type of covenant, but each covenant has its own rules, and each leader has their own rules. And then there are basic leader traits, and then there are wretched undead traits that you will give to a couple of your minions. And there's a bunch of different types of minions, and a couple different types of minions are unique, and some minions are very spammable, and some minions are more in the middle. But then you add weapons to each type of minion. So each minion comes with just like bare hands, and then you can replace bare hands with a weapon. And some minions can wield some types of weapons and some can't. So you have this like infinite customizability for your warband, and you can either use that to build really sweet combos, or you can just take miniatures that you love from another game and just use the minis to build that. So for example, the Legion of the Fallen in Malediction is a really cool, like fully built out undead army. They've got a whole bunch of different sculpts for the smaller undead forces, and this guy can easily be your ascended undead, or your revenant, or your lich, whatever you think he fits better in for Necropolis28. And then you could just create the weapons in there that match the minis that you've already got. And so you can either, again, build for sweet combos, or you can just build to fully express your army that you've been kit bashing and messing around with and building. You can just fully express them in the game and have like your dudes are specifically your dudes. There's no just like one size fits all character sheet. And then it makes it really easy to go print out your quote unquote gathering and play that way. And I think that's really cool. I think that's a really awesome, just way to allow players to make the game their own. So even though it kind of boxes you in terms of the flavor and the setting that you can go for, if that's a setting you're interested in, you can really sink into it, and it can be immersive in a way that very few games can be immersive once it's on there on the tabletop. And I think that is, finally circling back, that is why they talk about it as a diorama skirmish game, because this is really an aid to help yourself create the creepiest Halloween game you possibly can. And I think that's really awesome, and I think that that's something to get excited about. And if you love Warcry, if you love the Death Grand Alliance and wish there was more to it than just Soulblight Gravelords being really good, then I think that you'll really enjoy this game. Finally, yes, I went with one non-indie game, and that is Path to Glory. And the reason I wanted to talk about Path to Glory is because I have been playing it a lot, and because I played a tournament of AOS while I was at Adepticon, and I mostly had fun at that Age of Sigmar tournament. And I've been having fun in my Path to Glory campaign, a lot of fun. And I do think that Path to Glory is one of the easiest ways to just kind of give your Warcry miniatures a second life. A lot of these games that I've talked about, they are trying to sell you their own line of minis, and I wouldn't have picked them if I didn't really believe in their own line of minis. That is one of the things that I think, especially with Judgment and Malediction, really sets them apart from the competition. And so I think that if you sort of love your Warcry minis, if you've got, say, a bespoke warband and then like 3 boxes of AOS stuff to make a compendium warband that's on the same team as your bespoke warband, well, congratulations, you have a Path to Glory army probably, because it's only 1,000 points to start, and so you don't really need that big a group from a faction. I have found that, for example, with Khorne, because I got a little bit of everything to get all of the Bloodbound options and a little bit of everything to get all of the Demon options, I just have like 1,600 points of Khorne. And that's perfect for Path to Glory, because you can start a Path to Glory with that, and you don't even have to buy new miniatures until like close to the end. So if you play any of the Chaos Gods in Warcry, if you play Stormcast in Warcry, because there's multiple chambers, and like if you got Quester Soulsworn like I did, basically I'm playing Path to Glory with just my Quester Soulsworn, my Dominion box, and my Skaven Tide box. And that's it. Those are the 3 boxes that I've got, like the Stormcast half of those 2 starter sets, and then my Quester Soulsworn. And I'm just playing Path to Glory with them, and I'm doing great. I'm actually 3-1 in my Path to Glory, which is awesome, and it's going great. There's a lot of factions in Warcry that are kind of like that, where you can just kind of trip, fall, and end up with 1,000 points, and then you can play Path to Glory. And matched play can be a little bit of an issue, but the smaller games work great. I also really love the just campaigniness of Path to Glory. The number one thing I felt like was missing from the other games that I've talked about was a campaign. Necropolis28 can give you some campaign experience that is harder to get in the other games, but the Ravaged Coast setting in AOS right now, they're managing to squeeze an incredibly strong sense of place into the rules. I really think that it is really making AOS for me. They managed to get rules that evoke the Realm of Fire in a way that works on the tabletop in a smooth kind of situation, and you get a ton of conversion potential. So even in the rulebook, they put various converted fighters who are just like a little bit gnarlier than the average out of the box mini, a little bit more Realm of Fiery than the average out of the box mini, that kind of fit the setting a little bit better, which I think is really cool. AOS has gotten a lot of bad press, most of it from longtime AOS content creators, but if I can sort of stand in defense of Path to Glory here, a lot of what can be problematic about AOS matched play right now that a lot of people aren't necessarily loving, or like especially casual matched play, so like pickup games at your club, I think is something that a lot of people are frustrated with. I think a lot of people are saying that AOS works really well for spikes right now, works really well for people who are purely competitive, but isn't all that great for the more casual gamer. I think that Ravaged Coast really fixes that. There are no battle tactics in Path to Glory, and instead, for Warcry players, this will be incredibly familiar. There are Emberstones, and Emberstones act a lot like treasures in Warcry, except that they make you easier to kill and killier, which is actually one of the main issues with treasures. Is every once in a while you'll get a game where someone just absconds with a treasure, and you can just never clear them off the board, because the best you can do is like barely reach them for one attack later in the game, and at least this way they're easier to kill, so there's a better chance that that attack will actually do something, and they're killier, so now it tempts the opponent to actually come into combat with you, because if you're like mostly beating them in other parts of the board where other victory conditions are happening, they might feel like their extra killy treasure carriers actually really need to get involved in that combat, and then that'll give you the opportunity to come fight them, right? So there's kind of a lot of ways in which Emberstones, I think, really fix treasures in Warcry, and also just the gameplay is really excellent with them as Emberstones, because it just has an incredibly dynamic feel while being very simple to explain. The other thing that's happening is the paths themselves in Path to Glory are really evocative. And at first, I was a little dismissive of them. I did a strategy guide where I didn't dismiss the paths, but I was pretty honest about the fact that I think that they're less efficient. I still think that is true, but it's really easy to just bottleneck the amount of troops that you are allowed to recruit, right? Like a Path to Glory group can just really easily do that. And as soon as you do, it forces you to invest in other buffs, and boom, there are the paths just waiting for you, and there is an incredible amount of depth and interest that you can get in giving, various units onto various paths. And one of the main gripes with AOS right now in its index phase is there's just not enough flavor to each army, but each path is an incredible amount of flavor. Both like the abilities feel like they matter, the abilities feel like they're there for a reason. Most units are eligible for multiple paths, so Which one you decide to put them on is totally up to you, and you can create awesome combos and just tons of awesome stuff that you can do with each path, and I really love that. The other thing that Path to Glory kind of fixes is there is a starting unit limit of 350 points instead of it would be 500 for 1,000. So that means a lot of really giant monsters that can be a little bit wonky to play against in lower point games of Age of Sigmar. A lot of them are just not there, and a lot of them are really hard to get because you can't start with them, and then they take a lot of Ember Stones to recruit, and so you just might really struggle to bring them into your army, especially if your group is like gating the amount of points that you can do at each level of the campaign. And so it might be a long time before you end up facing one of those, and by that time you might be able to handle it a lot better. So I think that Path to Glory is really doing a lot of the stuff that a lot of folks who don't like Age of Sigmar, I feel like the reason they don't like Age of Sigmar is because they haven't tried Path to Glory yet, if I'm being honest. And I think that that's a really good thing. So I just want to recap because I'm just so excited about all of these games. I will be doing follow-up videos to Judgement, Malediction, and Necropolis28. I've already done a Path to Glory video that I really stand by. I think actually as a strategy guide for Path to Glory campaigns. Now that I've played pretty deeply into one, I actually think it pretty much holds up, which I think is really cool. I went from having never played AOS to going 3-1 while still never really making anyone feel like they hated my army. Or I think I managed to do that. We'll see. I don't know. So I think people should check out that video. For the other 3 games, I promise I will be doing follow-up videos probably over the course of the summer. For these, I have a couple Warcry things I really want to talk about. I am still excited about Warcry, but I have a couple things I want to get to, but I also would just want to learn more. I have a few email addresses from a few of the folks who help make these games that I want to contact them. I want to help get people into these games because I think that there are some really incredible indie games out there that could really become something. I said this already at the top of the show, so I won't go too into it, but I really do think that there's potential here to see an indie revolution in tabletop wargaming that just has not been possible before and is happening in the RPG space, and I would love to see it happen here. So, Judgement, loved my demo. Play this game if you love just like incredible, just one of the best combat systems you could possibly imagine. I mean, galaxy brained while still not taking very long. I can't believe how much depth they squeezed out of so little like space in terms of that combat. I think it's incredible. Malediction, play this game if you love I love the vibe of Malediction. I think they did hit that out of the park. But also play it if you love incredibly evocative play styles and genre blending. The way they managed to blend the card mechanics with classic miniature mechanics while also making it so that every faction, just like the play style is so strongly defined and so easy to get into the vibe of. I just think they did an incredible job there. And then play Necropolis28 if you love the undead. This is the most Halloween, the most undead of all undead games. But even from a purely mechanical perspective, I think the list building here is the best list building I've ever seen in a miniatures game, bar none. Just in terms of at least the best, let's say like JD Power best in initial quality type list building, in terms of the initial options open to you are just like so infinite and so cool that way. Finally, play Path to Glory if you love the Mortal Realms, if you love your Warcry miniatures, if you really want to see them take on a second life, and also if you love campaign growth mechanics. This is, I think, the best campaign that I've been involved in as far as the rules that are out there for sort of growing your warband over time and playing the actual games, making the actual games fun. We're late in the video late enough in the video now that I can make Mordheim lovers mad, but Mordheim has those really cool like in between game campaign pieces, but then the games themselves don't always play out the most compelling, and Path to Glory strikes that balance just so well. If you've made it this far, please consider joining the Patreon. I will be continuing to talk about all these indie games. We have a whole indie game space that we're going to be creating. There are some folks in my Patreon who are getting really into indie games. So please consider joining if you haven't already. We will be talking about more of these. And also consider joining if you want to hear more Warcry talk, because we will still absolutely do that. This channel will always be devoted, probably 1/3 Warcry, 2/3 whatever I think is the best miniature fantasy skirmish game on the market. For a long time, I was dead set on the idea that game was Warcry. And I'm not saying I don't think that anymore, but I will say that I was so impressed with these, especially these 3 skirmish games, that I am absolutely interested and ready to kind of pursue it and see how far it goes. So I will be trying these out. I hope you try them out too. And when you do, may all your rolls be crits. Not all of these games have crits, but some of them do.